That pilot filmed a Bigfoot family and she disappeared for it. 20 years doing this job and nothing has ever come close to what happened in those woods. I'm a private investigator, and 2 days after a helicopter pilot vanished without a trace, her family called me. The phone rang at 6 in the morning, which is never a good sign in my line of work. Early morning calls mean desperation, mean someone has exhausted every other option and can't wait another minute. The police had already written her off as a probable crash victim and said they'd resume the search in a week because of difficult terrain. A week. Anyone who knows anything about missing person cases understands that time is everything. The first 48 hours are critical. After that, survival rates drop dramatically. Wait a week and you might as well be looking for a ghost. The family knew this. You could hear it in their voices, that edge of panic barely held in check. The family knew this. They hired me on the spot, voices trembling over the phone, desperate for someone to do something now rather than later. The conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes, but I could hear the fear underneath every word. Their daughter, their only child, missing somewhere in the wilderness. The police had given them platitudes and promises, but no action, so they turned to me. I've found missing hikers, tracked down runaways, located people who didn't want to be located. I've worked cases in deserts and cities and everything in between. This should have been another case in the file cabinet, another successful search, another family reunion. But from the moment I hung up that phone, something felt wrong. Call it instinct or experience or just a gut feeling. But I knew this one was different. I couldn't explain why, I just knew. The police report was frustratingly vague. Signal stopped in a remote forest valley, coordinates weren't given to the family, just a general area, and a promise to look into it when conditions improved. When conditions improved, like the weather was the problem and not the fact that someone was missing. I spent half a day pulling favors from an old contact who worked with emergency services, someone who owed me from a case 3 years back. He got me the exact coordinates from the pilot's emergency beacon records. I didn't ask questions about how legal that was or what rules he had to bend. I just thanked him and started driving. The drive took me 4 hours into the mountains, following roads that got progressively worse until I hit a barrier where the pavement ended and a dirt logging road began. The last 20 miles had been rough, my truck bouncing over ruts and rocks, suspension working overtime. I parked at the barrier and sat there for a minute, looking at the map on my phone and the GPS coordinates glowing on the screen. The route ahead showed nothing but green, unbroken forest for miles. I checked my gear twice before starting, loaded my pack with 3 liters of water, a first aid kit, rope, emergency blanket, knife, compass, spare batteries, energy bars, and a basic toolkit. Everything I might need for a search and rescue. The sun was already past noon, which meant I had maybe 6 hours of daylight left. I needed to move fast. The forest was thick, old-growth trees blocking out most of the sunlight even in the middle of the day. Pine and Douglas fir towered overhead, some of them probably 200 years old or more. The forest floor was covered in a thick layer of needles, and the undergrowth was dense with ferns and brush. I followed the GPS coordinates, pushing through underbrush and climbing over fallen logs that were probably older than I was. Some of those logs were massive, 4 or 5 feet in diameter, moss-covered and rotting slowly back into the soil. My legs burned from the constant uphill grade. The terrain was relentless, steep slopes, and uneven ground that made every step a challenge. After an hour, I was sweating despite the cool temperature under the tree canopy. The forest was quiet except for the occasional bird call and the sound of my own breathing. No sign of other people, no trail markers, nothing, just endless trees and undergrowth. After 2 hours, I stopped to drink water and check my bearings. My GPS showed I was making good progress, but I still had at least another hour to go. My water bottle was already half empty, and I was starting to feel the exhaustion in my muscles. But I couldn't slow down. Somewhere ahead was the helicopter and hopefully some answers about what happened to the pilot. I pressed on, focused on putting one foot in front of the other, following the GPS arrow on my phone screen. The forest got even thicker as I climbed higher, the trees closer together, the undergrowth denser. I had to force my way through in some places, branches scraping my arms and face. By the time I finally reached the coordinates, I was exhausted and scratched up and ready to find that helicopter. When I finally reached the coordinates, I expected to find wreckage, a crash site with debris scattered across the trees, torn metal, broken rotor blades, evidence of a violent impact. That's what crash sites look like. But what I found made no sense at all. The helicopter sat in a small clearing, completely intact. The rotors were undamaged, no broken trees around it, no scars in the earth from a hard landing. The landing gear was properly deployed like someone had set it down intentionally and carefully. I circled the helicopter twice, searching for any sign of what might have caused an emergency landing. Nothing. The door hung open and the pilot's seat was empty. No blood, no signs of struggle, no indication of what happened. I climbed into the cockpit and started looking through everything. The controls were normal, gauges showed nothing unusual. Then I noticed a small camera mounted to the dashboard, the kind pilots use to record their flights. The battery indicator was flashing red, almost dead. I hit the playback button and watched the tiny screen. The footage started normal enough. She was flying her regular route over the forest, everything calm and routine. The helicopter hummed steadily, instruments all reading normal. The view through the windscreen showed nothing but endless green forest canopy stretching in all directions. Then suddenly the helicopter slowed. Something had caught her attention. She hovered over a clearing below, adjusting her position to get a better view. That's when I saw what made her stop. In the clearing stood a Bigfoot, not a bear, not a person in a costume, but an actual Bigfoot. Massive, at least 8 or 9 feet tall when standing fully upright, covered in dark brown fur that looked almost black in the shadows of the tree line. The Bigfoot stood on 2 legs near the edge of the clearing, its posture unmistakably bipedal, unmistakably intelligent. The proportions were wrong for any known animal. Arms too long, shoulders too broad, head too large and set differently than a human's. And next to the Bigfoot was a smaller one, maybe 5 feet tall, with lighter brown fur. The way they stood together, the way the smaller one stayed close to the larger one, the protective stance of the adult and the trusting proximity of the juvenile, it was absolutely clear they were family, a parent and child. They weren't doing anything threatening, just existing in that clearing, maybe foraging or resting, just living their lives until a helicopter appeared overhead. The footage showed the pilot circling for a better view, descending slightly to get closer. The Bigfoots looked up at the helicopter, then the footage showed the pilot starting to land right in that clearing. The last frames captured the adult Bigfoot staring directly up at the aircraft before the recording cut out. Battery must have died. I sat there in that cockpit, staring at the black screen, trying to process what I'd just seen. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the camera. I'd spent 20 years dealing with reality, with facts, with evidence and logic and things that made sense. Disappearances had explanations. Mysteries had solutions. Everything could be understood if you looked hard enough and thought clearly enough. But this made no sense. This shattered every assumption I'd built my career on. This was impossible. And yet I'd seen it with my own eyes on that recording, captured on digital media, undeniable and real. I pulled the camera free from its mount and shoved it in my jacket pocket. Evidence, proof of what she saw. Then I heard voices coming through the forest, male voices, coordinated, getting closer. I moved fast, slipping out of the helicopter and diving behind a thick cluster of brush about 20 yards away. I crouched low and waited. 2 men emerged into the clearing. They wore military fatigues, not the kind you buy at a surplus store, but actual military issue. No unit patches visible, no name tags, nothing identifying. Both carried rifles and had radios clipped to their tactical vests. They weren't park rangers, they weren't local police. These were military. They circled the helicopter slowly, checking it over. One of them pulled out his radio and spoke into it. The words came through clearly in the quiet forest. Still secure, no sign of civilian return. They were guarding the helicopter, waiting for someone to come back, waiting for the pilot, or waiting for someone like me, I couldn't tell which. I understood then that the pilot didn't just vanish on her own. This was organized. This was planned. And I was crouched in the brush with a camera in my pocket that could explain everything, surrounded by armed military personnel in the middle of nowhere. The soldiers settled near the helicopter, clearly planning to wait indefinitely. I couldn't go back the way I came without being spotted. The trail I'd hiked in on was directly behind them. I needed another way out. Slowly, inch by inch, I backed deeper into the forest, moving away from the clearing and away from my only known path back to civilization. The terrain got rougher as I moved. Thicker vegetation, steeper slopes, older trees that blocked out even more sunlight. I knew I needed to circle around to get back to my vehicle, but I also needed to put distance between myself and those soldiers first. I pushed through dense brush, trying to stay quiet, trying to stay hidden. That's when I started seeing the signs. Branches broken at 7 or 8 feet high, way too high for a human to reach without climbing. I almost dismissed them until I came across footprints in soft soil near a small creek. The prints were massive, easily twice the size of my boot, with 5 distinct toes. They were fresh, made within the last day or two at most. I told myself I was just heading back toward the trail, that the tracks happened to go the same direction I needed to go anyway. But I was following them, I couldn't help it. Part of me needed to know if what I'd seen on that camera was real. The forest got darker as I went deeper. Older trees, less sunlight, that particular quality of silence you only find in truly remote places. I'd been walking for maybe 2 hours when I heard sounds ahead. Low grunting, not quite animal and not quite human. I dropped to a crouch and moved forward very slowly. Through the trees I saw another clearing, and in that clearing were 3 Bigfoots. 2 adults and 1 younger one. Maybe a teenager if Bigfoots have teenagers. The adults were enormous, 8 or 9 feet tall easily, covered in dark brown fur that was matted and thick. They moved on 2 legs with a slight forward hunch, their arms proportionally longer than human arms, hanging down past their knees. Their hands looked surprisingly human-like, with opposing thumbs and individual fingers, but much larger and more powerful. Their faces were flat with prominent brow ridges that cast shadows over their eyes. When one turned toward me, I could see its features clearly enough to know this was no costume, no trick of light or imagination. The face had expression, intelligence, awareness. The nose was broad and flat, the mouth wide with visible teeth when it opened slightly to grunt at the others. This was a living creature, a thinking being, not some mindless animal. They were foraging, turning over rotted logs, and pulling bark from dead trees with methodical efficiency. One of the adults spotted grubs under a piece of bark and ate them casually, chewing with obvious satisfaction. Their movement showed incredible strength used so effortlessly it looked casual. I watched one adult grab a rotted log with both hands and pull it completely apart like it was made of paper, the wood splintering and crumbling under the creature's grip. The log was thick, probably 18 inches in diameter, and would have taken me an axe and 10 minutes of hard work to break up. The Bigfoot did it in seconds with bare hands. I stayed frozen behind a fallen tree about 50 yards away, barely breathing. The smell reached me even at that distance, like wet fur and decay and something wild I'd never encountered before. It filled my nostrils and made my eyes water. I watched them for maybe 20 minutes, unable to move, unable to look away. Finally, they moved off deeper into the forest, and I waited another 10 minutes before I dared to shift position. I tried to circle around the clearing, moving parallel to where the Bigfoots had gone, keeping my distance. That's when I heard engine sounds in the distance, then voices, multiple voices, organized, moving with purpose, a search pattern, more soldiers. I realized I was trapped between two impossible things. Behind me, creatures that shouldn't exist. Ahead of me, a military operation that shouldn't be happening. I spotted a massive fallen tree with a hollow beneath it where the roots had pulled up. I crawled into that hollow and pressed myself against the dirt, trying to make myself invisible. The soldiers got closer. I could hear them coordinating over radios, checking terrain features, moving in a systematic sweep. They were searching for something, hunting for something. I lay there in the dirt, barely breathing, as Boots walked past my hiding spot. 4 or 5 soldiers in tactical formation, rifles ready, eyes scanning the forest. One of them stopped maybe 10 feet from where I hid. I could see his boots through a gap in the roots. He stood there for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 30 seconds, looking around, checking the area. His radio crackled. Sector 7 clear, moving to Sector 8. He moved on, following his team deeper into the forest. I waited until I couldn't hear them anymore. My legs cramped from staying in one position, but I didn't dare move yet. Then I heard something else. Loud vocalizations, deep roaring sounds that echoed through the trees. Not human, multiple creatures, and they sounded angry or frightened or both. Shouts from the soldiers followed, then gunfire. But it didn't sound like regular gunfire, more like compressed air, like the pneumatic tools in a garage. Tranquilizer guns, I realized. I had to see what was happening. Moving as carefully as I could, staying low, I worked my way toward the commotion. I reached a ridgeline overlooking another clearing and looked down at absolute chaos. Soldiers surrounded 2 adult Bigfoots, both massive, both fighting. One of the Bigfoots charged at a line of soldiers who fired dart after dart into its chest. The Bigfoot kept coming, took 6 or 7 hits before it started to slow down. The second Bigfoot tried to flee but stumbled after only a few steps, already hit by multiple darts. Even drugged, the Bigfoots kept moving. They tried to crawl, tried to get away, movements getting slower and more uncoordinated. It took a full 10 minutes for the tranquilizers to completely work. The Bigfoots finally went still, sides heaving with labored breathing. More soldiers arrived with heavy equipment, moving quickly and efficiently. Large military trucks rolled into the clearing on a service road I hadn't even known was there. The road was hidden, probably kept clear specifically for this kind of operation. Scientists or medical personnel in white coats climbed out of the trucks. They approached the unconscious Bigfoots carefully, like they'd done this before, taking measurements and checking vital signs. Soldiers attached heavy chains to the Bigfoot's limbs. They used winches to drag the creatures onto flatbed trucks, the Bigfoot's bodies leaving deep furrows in the dirt. The scientists set up monitoring equipment, checking heart rates and breathing. One of the white coats injected something into each Bigfoot's neck, probably more sedative to keep them under during transport. They loaded the Bigfoots into specialized containment units on the trucks, metal cages reinforced with what looked like steel bars thick as my wrist. I heard a commander talking on his radio. 2 secured, at least 1 more in Sector 9. They were hunting multiple Bigfoots. This wasn't a rescue operation for the pilot. This was a creature capture operation. She'd just seen something she wasn't supposed to see. The commander gestured to the surrounding forest, and more soldiers spread out, continuing their sweep. I watched them load up and start organizing for the next phase. That's when it hit me how deep in trouble I was. Whatever happened to that pilot, I couldn't help her, not against a military operation this organized, this well-equipped. And if they caught me, I'd disappear just like she had. I needed to get out of this forest without being detected. But I couldn't go back toward the helicopter where I'd started. That area was crawling with soldiers. I couldn't go forward because that's where they were actively hunting. The only option I could think of was something I'd read about months ago while researching this region for a different case. There was a cave system in this mountain range, an old spelunking site that had been closed 10 years ago after a cave-in killed 2 people. The cave supposedly ran all the way through the mountain and exited somewhere near the highway on the eastern slope. It was dangerous, possibly blocked in places, but it was the only route I could think of that the military wouldn't be covering. I moved parallel to the military operation, keeping as much distance as I could while still heading generally east. It took me 2 hours of careful movement through dense brush, stopping every few minutes to listen for soldiers, constantly worried I'd stumble into another patrol. My clothes were torn from thorns and branches, my arms scratched and bleeding in a dozen places. Finally, I reached the rocky eastern slope and started searching. I found old warning signs, faded and weathered, but still readable. Danger, cave system unstable, entry prohibited. The signs were mounted on posts that had started to rot. Beyond them, I found the entrance behind some fallen boulders, partially blocked but with enough of an opening that I could squeeze through. I had 1 small LED flashlight on my keychain. That was my only light source. The beam was weak, meant for finding keyholes in the dark, not exploring cave systems. I looked at that narrow, dark opening and thought about all the reasons this was a terrible idea. No proper equipment, no backup, no one knew where I was. If something went wrong in there, I'd never be found. But then I heard voices in the distance behind me getting closer, soldiers, still searching, still hunting. I took a deep breath and squeezed into the cave. The temperature dropped immediately. Outside had been maybe 60 degrees, cool but comfortable. Inside the cave, it felt like 40, cold and damp, the kind of cold that seeps through your clothes and settles into your bones. The entrance tunnel was narrow, forcing me to duck and turn sideways in places. Rock pressed in from all sides, then the tunnel opened into a larger space. Inside was pitch black, except for my tiny light. The kind of darkness that's absolute, that presses against your eyes even with them open. The cave was larger than I expected. The main chamber had a ceiling maybe 15 feet high, natural limestone formations hanging down like stone icicles. Multiple passages branched off in different directions, dark mouths leading deeper into the mountain. Some were wide enough to walk through standing up, others looked like narrow crawl spaces. I found more warning signs inside, along with markers from old spelunking routes. Faded spray paint on the walls, arrows and numbers indicating passage identifications, instructions about which routes were safe and which were blocked or dangerous. Someone had mapped the system years ago, probably before the cave-in that got people killed. I could only hope their markers were still accurate. I followed the markers, hoping they'd lead to the other exit. The cave floor was uneven, covered in loose rocks and sudden drops. I had to watch every step. Water dripped somewhere deeper in the system, echoing in the darkness. The temperature dropped fast. Within minutes, I was shivering, the cold and damp seeping through my torn clothes. That's when I started noticing signs that I wasn't alone in these caves. Large footprints in mud on the cave floor, the same massive prints I'd seen in the forest. Drag marks on the cave walls at 8 feet high where something big had scraped past. Piles of bones in corners, animal remains mostly, but some looked disturbingly large. I found fresh scat in one chamber. It still smelled strong, that same wild scent I'd encountered in the forest. Some of these caves were being used right now, not abandoned dens from years past. The Bigfoots sheltered here. I had to be very quiet, had to avoid any occupied sections. Fear built in my chest as I realized I might encounter a Bigfoot in these tight confines with nowhere to run. I followed the markers through a narrow passage that opened into a large cavern. I swept my light around and froze. Movement in the far corner. A Bigfoot shape in the darkness, motionless against the cave wall. I could hear breathing, heavy and slow. The Bigfoot was sleeping or resting, alone, probably hiding from the military sweep happening above ground. The cavern was maybe 60 feet across. The next passage I needed was on the far side, directly past the sleeping Bigfoot. I checked every other tunnel branching off the cavern, dead ends or passages too narrow to fit through. I had no choice. I had to cross this cavern. I moved inch by inch. 30 feet took me 5 minutes. I placed each foot carefully, testing for loose rocks before putting my full weight down. The Bigfoot shifted in its sleep and grunted. I froze completely, not even breathing. 3 full minutes I stood there like a statue, my legs screaming from holding the awkward position. Finally, the Bigfoot settled back down and I continued moving. I reached the far side and slipped into the next passage. Only then did I let out my breath, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped my flashlight. That was too close, way too close. The cave system got more complex as I went deeper. Some passages sloped downward, taking me deeper underground where the air got thinner and harder to breathe. Others climbed upward through rock formations, requiring me to squeeze through gaps and pull myself up ledges. I kept following the markers, but some were missing or so faded I could barely see them. I reached an intersection with 3 different passages and no markers to show which way to go. I chose the middle passage because it seemed to slope upward. After 10 minutes, the passage narrowed significantly. I had to turn sideways to squeeze between the rock walls. My light caught something ahead and my heart sank. The passage was blocked, a cave-in probably from years ago, completely sealing the way forward. I had to backtrack. I returned to the intersection and tried the left passage instead. This one widened into another chamber, and this chamber showed clear signs of heavy use. Bones scattered across the floor, bedding made from vegetation piled in multiple spots. This was a family den. Multiple sleeping areas meant multiple Bigfoots. Then I heard sounds from the passage ahead, heavy footfalls, grunting. A Bigfoot was coming back. I looked around frantically and spotted a narrow fissure in the cave wall, just a crack in the rock, but wide enough that maybe I could fit. I squeezed into that fissure, the rock scraping my chest and back. I barely fit. I turned off my flashlight and stood there in complete darkness. The Bigfoot entered the chamber. I could hear it moving around, investigating, checking its den. The smell was overpowering in the enclosed space. I held my breath until my lungs burned, then took the smallest, quietest breath I could manage. The Bigfoot moved close to my hiding spot, so close I could have reached out and touched it. I heard it sniffing the air. 2 minutes felt like 2 hours. Finally, the Bigfoot moved to one of the sleeping areas and settled down. Its breathing slowed and evened out. I waited another 20 minutes in the darkness, my legs cramping, my back screaming from the awkward position. Then I carefully turned my light back on, keeping my fingers over it to dim the beam. The Bigfoot appeared to be sleeping. I slowly extracted myself from the fissure. Rock scraped against rock, a small sound, but it seemed loud as thunder in the cave. The Bigfoot's head lifted slightly. I froze again, counting heartbeats. 5 minutes passed. The creature settled back down. I moved past the sleeping Bigfoot as quietly as possible and exited through the far passage. The passage led down to an underground stream. Water flowed through a channel carved in the rock over thousands of years. I had to wade through it, knee-deep, the water so cold it felt like knives on my skin. The stream passage opened into a larger area with multiple water channels flowing through it. I heard splashing ahead, but not from the flowing water. I swept my light toward the sound and saw another Bigfoot in the water, drinking from the stream. It hadn't noticed me yet. I backed slowly into a side passage, pressing myself against the wall. The Bigfoot finished drinking and moved past my hiding spot. It passed so close I could see every detail. The fur was wet and matted, covered in mud. The Bigfoot's face had scars, old wounds across the brow that had healed into thick tissue. For just a moment, its eyes caught my light and reflected back yellow-green, like an animal's eyes at night. Then it was past me, moving down another tunnel. I waited until the sounds faded completely before continuing along the stream. The water led me to a natural chimney, a vertical shaft going straight up. Old climbing rope still hung from somewhere above, left by previous spelunkers. The rope was frayed and looked like it might fall apart at any moment, but I had no other option. I started climbing, using the rope for assistance, but trusting the natural rock holds more. 20 feet up, the rope suddenly slipped. I caught myself on the rock holds, fingers digging into narrow cracks. The rope fell past me into the darkness below. I had to climb the remaining 30 feet with just my hands and feet. My arms shook from exhaustion. My fingers were raw and bleeding. But I kept climbing, finding each hold by feel more than sight. Finally, I reached a ledge and pulled myself up, lying on the stone, gasping for breath. I was in a higher section of the cave system now. The air felt fresher, and I could see faint light in the distance. I moved toward that light source. It got brighter as I approached. The passage narrowed again, and I had to crawl on hands and knees through a tight section. The crawl space was claustrophobic, rock pressing in from all sides. At the narrowest point, I almost got stuck, had to exhale completely just to squeeze through. Then the passage opened suddenly, and I found myself in a twilit chamber. Natural light filtered down from above, from a skylight opening to the surface. I could see evening sky through that opening. I realized I'd been underground for 6 or 7 hours. But the opening was 25 feet up, way too high to reach. I searched the chamber for another way. The chamber had piles of items in the corners, more bones, some that looked disturbingly human, old camping gear, a shredded backpack, various objects the Bigfoots had collected and brought here. I moved closer and my blood ran cold. Pieces of cloth in a specific pattern. I recognized it. The helicopter pilot's uniform. I found her ID badge among the debris. Her photo looked back at me, a young woman with a smile and her whole life ahead of her. This confirmed my worst fears. Whatever happened, she hadn't survived. The Bigfoots had brought her here. Then I heard sounds from the passage I'd entered through. Heavy footsteps, multiple sets. The Bigfoots were coming back to their den. I looked around frantically. The only way out was up through that skylight opening 25 feet above me. I started stacking loose rocks against the wall, making crude steps. I got halfway up, reaching desperately for the opening. Behind me, I heard the Bigfoots enter the chamber. They saw me and began vocalizing loudly. deep roars that shook the cave. I pulled myself up with everything I had, arms screaming in protest, fingers finding any grip they could. I scraped through the opening, tearing skin off my arms and chest. I emerged on a hillside just as the sun touched the horizon, casting everything in orange and red. I looked back and saw a massive arm reaching up through the opening, trying to grab me. I ran down slope, crashing through brush, not looking back. I could hear enraged vocalizations behind me echoing across the mountain. I ran until my legs gave out, then I got up and ran some more. I ran for 30 minutes straight before I finally slowed down. My chest burned with every breath. I was completely exhausted, clothes torn to rags, covered in cuts and scratches and cave mud. But I recognized the terrain. I was close to the highway. I pushed through the last section of trees and stumbled onto the shoulder of a paved road. A truck was coming. I stood in the road and waved my arms. The driver stopped, probably more out of shock at my appearance than anything else. I asked him for a ride back to where my car was parked. He agreed, kept glancing at me like he was worried I might be dangerous or crazy. I didn't blame him. He dropped me off at my vehicle and I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, just shaking. I checked my pockets. The camera was still there, footage intact. The pilot's ID badge was there too. I had evidence of something huge, something that would change everything if people knew about it. But I also had no proof anyone would believe. The footage showed Bigfoots, but without context it looked fake. People would say it was staged, edited, a costume. The military operation was classified, no way to report it without disappearing myself. And the pilot was gone, her remains scattered in a cave I'd barely escaped from. I drove home in a daze, barely paying attention to the road. I spent an hour in the shower trying to wash off the cave mud and the smell and the memory, scrubbing until my skin was raw. I burned my clothes in the backyard fire pit. They were too torn and dirty to salvage anyway. Then I sat at my kitchen table and studied the pilot's ID badge for a long time. Her smile in the photo felt like an accusation. She looked so young, so alive, so full of hope and ambition. She'd worked hard to become a pilot, spent years training and getting her licenses and building her career. She loved flying. You could see it in her face in those photos at her family's house. And that love of flying had taken her over a forest clearing at exactly the wrong moment, had put her in the wrong place at the wrong time to see something she shouldn't have seen. I turned the badge over in my hands, feeling the weight of it. Plastic and metal, a simple ID card, but it represented a whole person, a whole life cut short. I thought about her family, about the photos on their mantle, about the empty chair at their dinner table, about the calls they'd never receive and the grandchildren they'd never have. All because their daughter saw something incredible and made the human decision to get closer. The next day, I met with her family. They invited me to their home, a small house in a quiet neighborhood where everything looked normal and safe and completely removed from the horror I'd just experienced. I sat in their living room and looked at photos of the pilot on the mantle. Her graduation photo, pictures from vacations, images of her with a helicopter she'd been so proud to fly. A whole life captured in frames. I returned their money, all of it, every dollar they'd paid me up front. They tried to refuse, said I'd done my best, said they appreciated the effort. But I couldn't keep it. I hadn't found their daughter alive. I hadn't brought her home. Taking money for that felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. So I left the cash on their coffee table and refused to take it back. I told them I couldn't find their daughter, that the trail went cold in the forest. I advised them strongly not to search themselves, not to go into those woods, not to hire anyone else to look. I told them something dangerous was out there and they needed to let the official search conclude and accept whatever they were told by the authorities. My voice was flat, emotionless, because if I let any feeling in, I would break down or tell them everything. They looked at my face, at the scratches still visible on my arms despite the long sleeves I wore, at the exhaustion I couldn't hide, and asked what happened to me out there. What did I see? What did I find? I could see the desperate hope in their eyes, the need to know something, anything about their daughter's fate. But I lied. I said I got lost, had a rough hike, fell into a ravine. Nothing more, just an unfortunate accident during my search. The disappointment on their faces cut deeper than any cave rock or Bigfoot claw could have. They wanted answers, and I had them, but I couldn't share them. They wanted truth, and I had it, but the truth would only put them in danger. They wanted closure, and all I could give them was more uncertainty wrapped in lies. It was one of the hardest conversations of my entire career. I did give them one thing: their daughter's ID badge. I said I found it near where the helicopter was. I told them it probably fell out during whatever happened. They held that badge and cried, and I felt like the worst person alive for not telling them everything. But telling them everything wouldn't bring her back. It would only put them in danger. I live with the knowledge of what happened, what I saw. I kept the camera footage, stored it on multiple drives in multiple locations. Sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I watch it. The Bigfoot and the juvenile in that clearing, looking up at the helicopter with what might have been curiosity or fear, or simple awareness that their world was about to change. That was the last peaceful moment before everything went wrong. That was the moment before discovery led to disaster. That footage shows the last thing the pilot saw before making the decision to land, before getting too close, before whatever happened next. The footage reminds me that some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some places should remain unexplored. Some truths are too dangerous to reveal. I still have nightmares about those caves, about yellow-green eyes reflecting in the darkness, about being trapped between things that shouldn't exist and people who silence witnesses. The pilot saw something she shouldn't have seen and paid the ultimate price. I got lucky, I got out alive. But I'll never forget that footage or what happened in those woods. I'll never forget the Bigfoot staring up at the helicopter or the military trucks hauling away chained creatures or the pilot's ID badge in a cave full of bones. I never took another missing person case in that region. Whenever someone calls about that area, I refer them to someone else. I tell people I'm too busy, that I don't work that territory anymore. The real reason is I know what's out there. I know what happens to people who see too much. Some people stay missing for reasons. Some disappearances have answers that are more terrifying than the questions, and some truths, once you know them, change you forever. I wish I could forget what I saw. I wish I could convince myself it was all a nightmare or a hallucination from exhaustion. But I can't. Because I have the footage, because I have the badge, because I have the scars. The family eventually stopped calling. The official search was concluded after 2 weeks with no body recovered. The helicopter was removed from the forest by the military, no public explanation given. The case was closed, marked as a probable accident in difficult terrain. The pilot became another statistic, another person who vanished in the wilderness. But I know the truth. I know what's in those forests and caves. I know there are creatures living in the remote places, hidden from the world, hunted by military operations that officially don't exist. I know there are things out there that would make people question everything they believe about reality. And I know I can never tell anyone the full story, because the people who know what I know either work for the military operation or end up missing. There's no middle ground. You either join them or you disappear. I chose a third option. I walked away. I kept my mouth shut. I stayed alive. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice, if I should have gone to the media, published the footage, exposed everything. But then I remember the firepower I saw, the organization, the efficiency of that operation. They'd been hunting Bigfoots for a long time. They knew what they were doing. And they had no qualms about making problems disappear. So I keep the footage hidden. I keep the badge in a safe deposit box. I keep my story to myself. And I live with the nightmares and the knowledge and the guilt of not being able to save that pilot or tell her family what really happened. That's my burden to carry. 20 years I did this job and never encountered anything I couldn't explain. Then one case changed everything. One missing pilot led me to creatures from legends and a secret military operation and a truth so big I still can't fully process it. I survived, but survival came at a cost. The cost is knowing things I wish I didn't know, seeing things I wish I hadn't seen, carrying secrets that weigh heavier with every passing day. But what choice did I have? Tell the truth and disappear? Keep silent and live with the guilt? There are no good options when you stumble into something like this. I think about the pilot sometimes, what her last moments must have been like. Landing in that clearing, seeing the Bigfoots up close, maybe approaching them out of curiosity or to document an incredible discovery. Then something went wrong. Maybe the Bigfoots attacked, maybe the military arrived, maybe both. However it happened, she didn't make it out. Her footage shows that last peaceful moment before everything changed. The adult Bigfoot and the juvenile standing in the clearing, unaware that a helicopter was about to land nearby. Unaware that discovery would bring danger. That frozen image haunts me more than anything else. That moment of calm before the storm. I've thought about destroying the footage and the badge, removing all evidence and trying to forget. But I can't do it. Maybe someday this information will be important. Maybe someday someone will need to know the truth. Or maybe I just can't let go of the only proof I have that I'm not crazy, that this all really happened. Years have passed now. I still work as a private investigator, but I'm more selective about cases. I avoid anything involving missing persons in remote areas. I avoid anything that might lead me back to those woods. I've built a good life, a safe life, a normal life. But part of me is still in that cave, crawling through darkness, surrounded by creatures that shouldn't exist. Part of me is still watching that footage, seeing the Bigfoot look up at the helicopter with what might have been curiosity or concern or awareness that humans had finally found them. Part of me is still hiding in the hollow beneath that fallen tree while soldiers walk past. Part of me is still climbing that rope in the dark, racing against time and fear and exhaustion. Those experiences changed me. They changed how I see the world, how I understand what's possible, what might be hiding in the wild places. The certainties I had before are gone. Now I know that reality is stranger and more dangerous than most people imagine. Now I know there are secrets worth killing to protect and truths that can't be spoken. The hardest part is maintaining the silence. Every time I see a news story about someone going missing in the wilderness, I wonder if they saw something they shouldn't have. Every time I hear about unusual military activity in remote areas, I wonder if they're still hunting. Every time someone mentions Bigfoot as a joke or a legend, I have to bite my tongue and stay quiet. Because if I speak up, if I tell the truth, I become a target. And I've seen what happens to targets. I've found the evidence in caves, scattered among bones and torn equipment. I've seen the efficiency of the operation designed to contain and capture. I've seen the firepower and organization they bring to bear. I'm not brave enough or stupid enough to challenge that. So I carry the story alone. I share it now, carefully, without names or exact locations or specific details that might identify anyone. I share it as a warning to others who might be tempted to go looking for answers in those woods. Don't. Trust me when I say some questions are better left unasked. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. That pilot filmed incredible footage before she disappeared. She captured proof of something amazing and terrifying. And that footage, that proof, that moment of discovery cost her everything. I hope she understood what she was seeing. I hope she appreciated the magnitude of her discovery in those last moments. I hope it was worth it somehow. But I doubt it, because discovery means nothing if you don't survive to share it. Truth means nothing if it gets you killed. Evidence means nothing if it has to stay hidden forever. The pilot's footage exists, but the world will never see it. Her story is real, but it can never be told. She found something incredible and paid with her life, and the rest of us have to pretend it never happened. That's the reality I live with. That's the weight I carry. I know the truth about what's in those woods and what happened to that missing pilot, and I can't do anything with that knowledge except keep it locked away and hope nobody else makes the same mistake. Hope nobody else goes looking. Hope nobody else finds what she found. Because if they do, they won't come back either. The pattern is clear once you know to look for it. People disappear in those woods, helicopters go down, equipment fails, signals stop. And the official explanation is always the same. Difficult terrain, harsh conditions, unfortunate accident, nothing more to see here. But there's everything to see if you know where to look. There are Bigfoots living in cave systems and forest clearings. There are military operations hunting them systematically. There are capture teams with tranquilizer guns and containment units. There are scientists studying something they can't acknowledge publicly. There's an entire hidden world existing parallel to ours. And there are people like me who stumbled into that world accidentally and barely made it back out. People who know too much and can't tell anyone. People who carry footage and evidence and scars and nightmares. People who chose survival over truth. People who live with that choice every single day. I don't know if I did the right thing. I don't know if staying silent makes me a coward or a survivor or something in between. I only know I'm still alive, still functioning, still trying to live a normal life while carrying this abnormal knowledge. Maybe that's all anyone can do when faced with impossible choices. The pilot's family deserves to know what happened. They deserve closure and truth and justice. But I can't give them that without putting them in danger. I can't expose the truth without becoming the next target. So they live with uncertainty and I live with guilt, and the real story stays buried along with everything else. Maybe someday things will change. Maybe someday the truth will come out through some other channel. Maybe someday the military operation will be exposed, or the Bigfoots will be acknowledged, or the cover-up will collapse under its own weight. Maybe. But I'm not holding my breath. For now, I keep my head down and my mouth shut. I work my cases and pay my bills and try not to think about caves and creatures and that pilot's smile in her ID photo. Most days I succeed, some days I don't. And every day I'm grateful to still be here, still breathing, still alive despite everything. This is my story. This is what happened when I went looking for a missing helicopter pilot and found something I never expected. This is what I carry now, for better or worse. And this is why I'll never take another case in those mountains, never go back to those forests, never return to that place where reality and legend overlap. Because I got out once, I survived once, and I'm not stupid enough to test my luck twice. For more interesting stories, check this out.